Julie turned to face me when she reached the door. "Thank you, Braden. Will we see you tomorrow?" "Still would." She stood on the tips of her toes and kissed me tenderly on the cheek. Her scent lingered for a moment as she turned and walked out into the hallway. I watched her hips sway back and forth as she walked towards the elevator. She was a beautiful young woman. There was no doubt about it. She turned and waved at me before disappearing. As soon as I slammed the door to my apartment, she started. "A little young for you, don't you think?" I paused, staring at the door trim, momentarily wishing there was a mirror so I could see my own expression. I was waiting, but he still didn't appear. Maybe it's finally over. Maybe I've finally moved on. I looked for anger, but there was none. "Well, she's young, Melanie. I don't know about the rest." I turned and walked past her, not bothering to look at her again. I entered my attic and headed to the kitchen, suddenly feeling the need to drink. I opened the refrigerator to do a quick inventory. There were fruits and vegetables that I liked. Chicken breast, defrosted for a dinner I no longer intended to cook. Yogurt, milk, energy drinks, and beer. I grabbed just one, of the 7 bottles left from the case I bought almost a month ago. This was a far cry from the pace I set in the first year after my divorce. I heard her following me. The clicking sound of her heels was the complete opposite of my bare feet. I opened the bottle and placed it on a small stainless steel countertop. I opened the cabinet door to place the bottle cap in the trash can, exactly where it was supposed to go. Everything was in its place. As always, order, carefully, purely. I walked into the living room, crossing the invisible line that demarcated the large open spaces. Kitchen, dining room, office, bedroom, gym, living room. All the furniture was of the highest quality, but could never be mistaken for a matching set. The living room was no exception. 2 hard black leather chairs on one side separated by a metal end table and a crystal lamp. An oversized chocolate leather sofa was next, fronted by a huge 60-inch display and a wooden coffee table with a glass top. But most of all, I liked the reclining chair. Plush tan leather, big enough to accommodate my 6 feet 4 inches. It was definitely comfortable enough to sleep in. Nothing matched, but nothing looked out of place. Every item called to me when I bought it. Each thing had its own story. Everything was mine, so everything fit. Everyone except her. "Aren't you even going to offer me a drink?" This was the first time I actually stopped to look at her. She came without warning. It was the first time I saw her in 8 years. I was honest enough with myself to admit that she looked good, even beautiful. But then again, she always had the looks. I had problems with her other qualities. "I wouldn't want you to get the impression that your presence here is welcome. You are not my guest. If you need something, you can find it yourself." I watched her spin on her heels and head back to the kitchen. I missed that ass. After all, she was perfect. She knew it too. That is why, as at that moment, she most often wore a skirt that said, "Yes, I know what you're looking for." I let my eyes wander from her sexy ass to her long, slender legs, to the straps around her ankles, to the 4-inch heels of her what must be very expensive shoes. I let my primal desires rule the moment, imagining her bending at the waist more for my pleasure than to find what she was looking for. I waited for the longing to awaken within me, a reminder of the pain and mental anguish that always comes when you are forced to look at something that is no longer yours, what was taken away, stolen, lost. But instead, I felt something completely different. Pride, perhaps? It was definitely more like, yes, I possess this body. She returned, finding her signature wine glass and Chardonnay. Her eyes were calm, coldly hiding her true intentions. For the first time, as far as I remember, this realization did not frighten me. "You look good, Braden." "I feel good, Melanie." The chess match began, and it was nice not to be on the defensive from the start. "You're not even going to ask me why I'm here. Aren't you even the least bit interested?" "It's not that I'm not curious. A person can never have too much information." Her smirk told me she thought we were equals. I just don't care. Even in the most unexpected situations, Melanie had an amazing ability to maintain a poker face. I knew this firsthand, so it was nice to see her flinch slightly, even if it was only for a second. She turned to face my wall, filled with framed photographs of my trip. It was a floor-to-ceiling reminder of how I got here and the lessons I've learned. Bottom. That's what it's called. I've heard people talk about it, but I never felt this way. But that's exactly where I started, right after Melanie divorced me and ruined my life. I won't lie and say our marriage was perfect. This is wrong. It was very difficult for us in the beginning, mainly because we didn't have more than $20 to spare at any given time. However, we were young, hopeful, impulsive, and driven. Our marriage didn't break up at the very beginning because we didn't believe it was possible. After all, soulmates never give up on each other. Thus came memories and moments like finding change in the couch so we could scrape together enough to share a fast food meal and have enough leftovers to share a cupcake for our first anniversary. Or when we made our first Christmas decorations out of paper and crayons and hung them on an artificial tree we found in the trash heap behind our apartment. When Melanie laminated them before our second Christmas, I loved her even more, and even more every year when we hang them on the tree. However, even when you love someone, they can be annoying. Melanie had a habit of rearranging things. She would clean out and replace all the dishes in the kitchen, or the spices on the shelf, or everything in the hallway cupboard in a pattern that made sense only to her. As soon as I got used to the new configuration, it did it again. It was a small thing, and would have been fine if it weren't for the fact that when she finished, she couldn't remember where anything was. Honey, where are the scissors? Somewhere in a box. They are not where they were last week. Have you moved them? Maybe. I can't remember. Just keep looking. They're here somewhere. I often had to go out and buy replacements for missing items if I needed them urgently. Sometimes weeks passed before everything appeared again. And we were broke, so any additional expenses were a problem. So, yeah, it was a little annoying. Although most often I never thought about the lack of funds. Probably because of sex. She was as insatiable as I was. If we were alone for 5 minutes, anywhere and at any time, we most often found ourselves undressed. I liked the note of desperation in her voice when I gave in to her. She was perfect, with a slight sheen of sweat on her gorgeous tanned skin. Her body was young and fit, soft and voluptuous, an impossible combination of femininity and sexuality. And I liked her look. The one I liked the most was the one that announced long before she took off her clothes that they wanted to take me to bed. I never got tired of her crystal blue eyes. Memories. These were important things. After the dust settled from our divorce and I put the cap back on the bottle, I saw the light for the first time. Those difficult years, when we never knew where the money for next month's rent would come from, showed me that together, we can survive even in the worst situation. For Melanie, they were a nightmare that would never happen again, at any cost. I watched as she examined my collection. Her eyes betrayed her with a vengeance as she looked at photographs of the places we always said we would visit together, back when our dreams were unrealistic but shared. She was the embodiment of walking sexuality. The glass dangled in her fingers, the wine swirling in time with the sway of her hips. When she tilted her head to look at the photographs in the top row, her shoulder-length blonde hair draped over the shoulders of her silk blousie, revealing the soft flowing lines of her neck. I think it's true. You've actually been to all these places. Yes. She watched me again, as if trying to predict my next move. Unfortunately for her, I didn't have one. You have changed. Oh, I doubt that's true. In fact, I know that this is not true. I am the same person I always was. Perhaps just a little more than me and a lot less than you. See, that's what I mean. You would never have said such things to me before. Life is full of things we want to say, plan to say, dream of saying, and remain silent. We get lost in this silence, or we lose the person we are supposed to be. Are we pretending to be something we are not? I spent a lot of time looking for an answer to this question. In the end, I decided that we try to be who we think we are until someone shows us our reflection in the mirror and we can no longer maintain the lie. Some people deal with shocking truths better than others. Maybe. The grin returned. I knew it. So what's different now? You can't take anything else from me. We are not connected in any way, and that means you can't hurt me anymore." She began to speak with a lump in her throat. I wanted to believe that she was touched, but I didn't believe it, not a bit. "I want you to stop this." "I didn't start this." "But you can stop this." "I'm not sure that this is true, although even if I could, I'm not sure I would do it." "You're enjoying it?" "Not particularly. I have little interest in being constantly reminded that the person I loved most in the world was a lying, cheating bitch. I do not know why. It's not like I said anything she hadn't heard before. But I could tell that this time it bothered her, at least a little. "Besides, I'm smarter now." "Never interfere with your enemy when he makes a mistake." Sun Tzu? Napoleon. I was completely unprepared for the complete devastation that befell me during our first conflict. I wasn't ready this time either, but fortunately, I wasn't alone. Rumors began to circulate several months earlier. People whispered everywhere I went. The economy was in shambles, work, any work, was worth its weight in gold, and layoffs loomed on the horizon. Walking around the factory floor was quite unpleasant. Eyes followed my every move. People stopped me when they thought no one was looking and asked if I had seen the list. But at home, I felt much worse. Melanie was close to panicking, asking me every day if I had heard anything. Do I still have a job? Am I sure? What was my plan? What were we going to do? I didn't have a plan. Yes, I didn't need him. My boss was a good person and had my back. He looked me in the eyes and told me not to worry. So, I wasn't worried. And everything would be fine if he made the final decisions and other people did not interfere. If there were any signs, I missed them. There were some possibilities. I realized this when it was already too late. Our sex life has noticeably deteriorated. I thought it was stressful. I knew I wasn't in the mood like before. I guess I thought it was my fault, not hers. And then Melanie found out that even before I crossed the threshold of the house, I was laid off. My boss was dumbfounded when he told me that the person with the highest productivity on the team and the best quality rating had been lost from his staff. Melanie wasn't even surprised. Unfortunately, this was not my only long-term commitment that was about to be ruined. Melanie gave me absolutely no hint that our marriage was in trouble. She easily performed all the actions of an obedient wife. Loving hugs, kisses on the cheek, so that I am full and there is not a spot in the house. In the last few weeks, she's been much more like Susie the housewife. She never let me leave the room without telling me that she loved me, probably to hide her guilt. I was served while I waited in line to access company-sponsored outplacement resources. I arrived home to find the locks had been changed, the clothes were boxed up and lying on the driveway, and another copy of the court order was neatly placed on top. My severance pay should have been enough for several months, but I was almost immediately faced with a choice. Should I use the remaining funds to fight for divorce and custody of my daughter, or should I live? I chose to fight, but I just didn't have the strength. Lawyers, psychologists, judges, all came to the same conclusion. I was a mentally abusive, unfit parent. I was unemployed and had no means to care for my child. I was worthless. They said it in writing. Everything is according to the law. The final blow came when I had my latest crazy idea. If I could just talk to April face to face, she would listen. At that time, she was 9 years old enough to tell them that she loves her daddy, that she wants to see me, and that we look alike. And so I stood in the dark, behind the bushes, hoping to see her. I looked at what used to be my home. This was the first time I saw them together. My wife, my daughter, and the company's vice president of operations. He was the son of the founder of my former company, a womanizer, an asshole, and possibly the worst business manager to ever hold a leadership position. But his old man was respected, people were devoted to him, and the only life that was destroyed was mine. And I was nobody. That's what they all said. He was a strange-looking man, 10 years older than me, with a widening waist, a large checkbook, and a pre-established family. I would be the first to admit that my description was biased by my hatred. It wasn't deformed or anything, but all I could see was deformity. That evening I drank for the first time. Not the first one in my life, but the first one I took to hide my pain. It was a long drink. It lasted a year. It could have lasted forever, but I saw it one more time. I wandered the streets. Untidy facial hair, unwashed clothes, and a foul smell that announced my presence long before I showed up. I was a couple of weeks away from becoming homeless, if you could call my ramshackle one-room apartment in a nearly decommissioned pre-war building home. She was leaving one of the boutiques in the city center, bags weighing down her arms. She searched in her designer handbag for the keys to her luxury SUV. I think I scared her. Actually, I know I'm scared. She was momentarily confused about what to do next. Protect her property or her body. The drunken haze that cut me off from the real world meant I wasn't a threat to her. It took me too long to get to know her. The words, "Oh God," and her hands covering her mouth in shock before she started the car and drove away were finally recorded a few minutes later. A few minutes after that, I stole a bottle of beer from a store. That's why I was looking for a bottle opener. I was too stupid to take the screw cap bottle, and Melanie was again rearranging kitchen utensils for no reason. I couldn't find the damn bottle opener. After the bottle had been broken, and the contents of all but one of the boxes had been thrown onto the floor, I found it. Melanie wasn't there. It wasn't our house, and the bottle opener was where I'd left it, where she was supposed to be. Everything was in its place. I stopped drinking that day and left my hometown the next day with a backpack full of everything I owned and almost $50 to my name. It was easy to stop. I wasn't an alcoholic. I was a broken man trying to hide in a bottle, and he failed. Now all your quotes are inspiring? Not always. Not everything inspires someone. Sometimes things just remind us of where we've been. What the fuck, Braden? What does this even mean? I have no idea what that means to you, but honestly, I'm not interested in explaining what anything means to me. Especially you. That first time, I wandered for 18 months, walking, hitchhiking, and sometimes taking the bus. I worked odd jobs until I had enough money to move on. Money was tight, but my eyes were open. I set up camp wherever I found myself. There was always a place to lie down, shower, and eat. I treated myself to anything that looked interesting at any used bookstore I passed by. I could buy a dozen books for the price of one movie. And I read. I wrote down everything I wanted to remember and everything I felt in a battered old spiral-bound notebook. It was a diary of pain and discovery. I followed world events through newspapers that others threw away. They were often out of date, but the news that filled those pages still didn't affect me. And I talked to people. Well, mostly I listened. People loved to talk, and I was a good listener. One day I splurged on a used digital camera at a pawn shop. I took photographs to remember the places I've been, the people I've met, and much later, the things that inspired me. About once a month for $5, one of the chain drugstores transferred all my photos from a memory card to a CD. A year and a half later, I settled in a small, dusty town in the center of the country. I was working my first full-time job after my divorce in the warehouse of a fertilizer plant. I worked hard hauling shit during the day and retreated to my rented room above the local garage at night to read and write. I traded in my laptop for a used one and spent my free days at the local library, using their free internet to upload my thoughts and photos to the blog. People followed me, commented anonymously, and although I wrote as a cathartic alternative to therapy, I liked knowing that people were interested in what I had to say. I really liked it. Melanie stopped at the only photograph of my former family, a strip of photos from a kiosk at an amusement park. April was 4 years old at the time. Her ponytail was wrapped in pink ribbons, and her recently pierced ears sparkled with fake diamond stilettos. The overly bright flash could not compete with the smiles on the faces of the three subjects. Each one captured this moment. The first was surprised, the next, stupid, and then sincere laughter. I could help you contact her. Help you reconnect. Oh, so you're close? Are you aware of all the latest comings and goings of your daughter? I saw how she was trying to find information in my gaze. It must have been hard for her not to have an advantage, not to be one step ahead, to be interested in what I knew or didn't know. You should be proud. She turned out to be just like you. I saw shock in her eyes at this comment. And something else. Maybe regret? She also stopped to look at her. I think she was surprised that the images didn't match her memories, or maybe with what she was told. It's hard to say for sure because she didn't comment. I never considered myself a writer. In a previous life, I was a production manager at a large manufacturing company, because that was my position after my 4th promotion. I started from the very bottom and worked my way up. I have never been a writer. I never dreamed of writing. But that didn't stop an online men's magazine from including my blog in their best of the internet list. And this did not stop them from inviting me to write a column, first monthly, and then weekly. The money wasn't very big, but the doors were open. 2 years later, a letter from the publishing company came as a complete surprise. They wanted to see more of my work. They wanted to publish my book, which did not exist at that time. I sent them a mostly incoherent collection of essays. They sent me an editor who asked me to write an introductory chapter about how my journey began. That was the first time I shared my story with an editor. Then nothing happened. At least for several years. I decided it wasn't good enough, but I continued to write on my blog. The popularity of my column grew. The money was getting a little better, but I was bored. So I left again, this time to Europe. There are no hostels for 35-year-old men. There are no reduced fare train tickets. But I still crossed the continent as cheaply as I could. I saw something that I had previously only seen in textbooks or on TV. I visited places where history and traditions were born. And I didn't stop. From Europe, I went to the Middle East, then to India. I spent 3 months in Asia. Languages, culture, food, all this was a new experience for me. I saw what it meant to be truly poor and not the shameful excuse I cursed. The people were still the same. People everywhere loved to talk. I was 14 months into my last trip and ready to return to the States when another letter arrived, previewing the cover of my book. That's when things got interesting. I flew home to a host of agents, editors, publishers, and lawyers. Due to the growing popularity of my column, people started talking about my book. I turned that hype into a fairly significant increase from the magazine, based largely on a convoluted ad revenue formula. This was more than I had ever earned before, and it was more than enough for me. So I returned to my hometown to start a new life in a place where I grew up, loved, and missed dearly. Unfortunately, my book was published with an average response. This is far from what some had hoped for. To be honest, I wasn't very surprised. My rabid following on my blog and columns probably accounted for 99% of my sales. Unfortunately, poor sales meant that my career as an author was likely over before it even began. Then he went on television to call my first chapter a bunch of lies. It was a local reporter from my hometown who asked questions. Was the story in my book true? Did he really deprive me of my job, steal my wife and daughter from me, and spread lies about me in court? He didn't have to say anything. He should have said nothing, but he didn't. In most countries of the civilized world, this story did not even cause excitement. But in my hometown, the son of a wealthy businessman and the ex-wife of a writer, it was a juicy story. And, either from embarrassment or arrogance, he overdid it. He sued me for libel and insult to character. That was all the publisher needed. They spent time and money reviewing my book and spent even more time and money on editing, design, production, and distribution. So when they saw an opportunity to get some of their money back, they swooped in. They sent an army of expensive lawyers and public relations specialists to my former employer. I watched from the side. It wasn't about him or me. It was about the dispute and the free advertising that came with it. His actions caused a great stir, and my book hit the bestseller lists. It's strange how life works. Some people just never learn to quit while they're ahead. Do you know that the board of directors asked him to resign? No, I did not hear. I'm actually amazed that he lasted this long. Productivity fell 21% after his brilliant cuts in the first year, and 18% the next. Sales dropped and morale dropped. Your husband is an asshole, never good at management. I wasn't surprised that she didn't come to his defense. She would never take a bullet for me. Why do I think you already knew? Because you are a cold, calculating, and heartless woman. It's a shame because based on the papers I just signed for Julie, I think he's going to need that money. Was that your lawyer? She's not mine. And she's not a lawyer. She is a paralegal. She works for the firm that represents my publisher. I'm trying to tell you that it's not about me, although obviously I will benefit greatly. I think karma really exists. I saw the responses flashing in her eyes. There was so much she wanted to say and she wished she could. And I saw that she had finally come to the conclusion that there was nothing left in her tank, that I will have an advantage in any case. I was hoping that she would give me the opportunity to use some of the phrases that I was dying to use, but at the same time, I wanted her to just go away and leave me alone. So why are you here? This took her by surprise, but she quickly recovered. Oh, are you curious now? No, I just don't understand what you think you can achieve. I guess he should be grateful that you love him so much that you're here, trying to save the last piece of his crumbling empire. But like I said, it's really not up to me. I appreciated her reaction. It was exactly what I expected. But it's not him you love, is it? And his money. Oh, what an irony. He had them. But now, ironically, he will have to give them to me. And you will have nothing again. What? Don't you think you can find another rich sugar daddy to have sex with for money? I think you underestimate yourself. You still have a hot body. You will land on your feet, or in your case, perhaps on your back. Everything was wrong. I'm not sure I've ever laughed so hard in my life. She couldn't even imagine that things were different. But her body language was protective, and her eyes said it was. I was taken aback for a moment. Could she not know? Is this even possible? Oh my God, you do not know. What the hell does that mean? I was silent for some time, quickly doing mental calculations. But I couldn't find any pitfalls. After months of interviews, depositions, and motions to open the case, it was all part of the record. If she truly didn't know, he had to know that she would find out. I wouldn't hurt the case by telling her about something that would soon become public knowledge. You're right. It wasn't like that at all. I'm just speaking out of place. Everything was innocent. Right? Yes. It was almost a whisper, and I thought about asking her to repeat it. But I didn't. Of course, he simply contacted the families of his employees to make sure that everyone was aware of the situation at the plant. Made sure everyone was preparing for the worst-case scenario. Of course, he paid special attention to the most vulnerable of the group, middle managers. We were at greatest risk, and he felt that his personal attention was needed. She listened intently, but I had no idea what she was thinking. That's why he invited you to dinner to warn you. Of course, nothing has been decided yet. Everything was just preliminary, and from time to time, he would call you to give you the inside scoop on how the employee evaluation process was going. Then, a few more casual lunches, a few more phone calls, and then he changed his tactics. He poured out his heart. The stress of having so many lives dependent on his decisions was too much. What was offered to him to save people was so shocking. Money, sexual services. This must have really shocked Melanie because her eyes were as wide as I had ever seen them. As I spoke, I walked over to my desk, looking for the file I needed. When I found it, I continued my story. And then, you sealed our destinies. It was a moment where he won and I lost. The moment when your trust in me as a man, as a father, as a husband, as a provider, gave way to your greed. It was then that you gave him your body and destroyed my whole world. I put the papers on the table. She stared at them for a moment, as if they might burn her fingers if she touched them. I have never seen these lists and always thought their existence was a myth. But my publisher's lawyers combed through thousands of documents discovered during the discovery process. The one she was holding wasn't all that interesting, except that my name was at the top of the list of employees to keep. Judging by the dates, this was one of the first lists compiled, perhaps even the very first. The second one was much more interesting. Of course, the names were the same. But on the second list, there were almost incoherent entries by John Davis. Check marks next to several names, and my name, and another, crossed out with one red line. And mine was marked with one word, Melanie. Only one other name has been noted in this way. The lawyers couldn't believe he kept it. But then again, he was always an idiot. The third list was printed on his own letterhead, marked Final. And, not surprisingly, my name was no longer on it. Her eyes darted back and forth in a mental question that I was sure had an answer she didn't believe. And now you're wondering, how does he know all this? She looked at me, her mouth slightly open. Stunned, she didn't look her best. You will understand this. You're stupid, but not that stupid. Do you know what I mean? The desire to drink more was strong. So I got up from the chair and went to the kitchen. I threw a few ice cubes into a glass and inserted it into the refrigerator opening to fill it with filtered water. If I've learned anything, it's to never give in to my desires. Decisions made after careful planning and analysis of possible consequences were more pragmatic. That, and the fact that drinking in the same room as Melanie seemed to be asking for trouble. Since we're just putting everything out there for everyone to see, I might be interested in a few things. Have you ever loved me? Melanie looked at the documents for about 20 minutes. After about 5 minutes, I noticed that her grip was tightening and her hands were shaking. After a few minutes, her completely stoic expression returned. All this time, she did not say a word, and I decided to break the silence. Apparently, she didn't want to answer my question because she turned her head to meet my gaze and then quickly looked away. I would have paid more attention to Melanie, but I just couldn't understand why she was sitting in my attic. I definitely had questions and I wanted answers, but I couldn't get to them because her sudden appearance didn't make any sense. Less than 48 hours had passed since Mr. Moneypants' lawyers requested a settlement conference. My lawyer and my publisher's lawyer staged an impromptu celebration that evening, viewing this move as an admission of defeat. But in a world ruled by sharks, these guys were killer whales. They didn't shy away from the fight. They wanted it. They looked for it and did everything they could to find it. Victory was not enough. They like to humiliate people. I'm sure none of them have read my book. Everything I wrote was against everything they stood for. And yet, it was nice to have them around. Finding yourself on the other side of the table with nothing but righteousness on your side and being crushed was not a fun experience. So yes, I could easily and correctly be called a hypocrite. But I didn't start down this path, so I happily went along it. I was lost in these thoughts when I looked at Melanie again. She was the same beautiful woman as before. I smiled at the thought that I had been right all along. I often told her that with age, she would only become sexier. Honestly, I had no idea why she dressed up like that for me. She looked like she was ready for a night on the town, or rather a night on the hunt, and then it hit me. Damn it! He sent you here. I'm not sure I've ever seen Melanie so angry. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever seen her angry. When we were married, even during our worst fights, she never got angry. Disappointed? Certainly. Annoyed? Undoubtedly. Scared? More than I could have imagined. This was the main reason why her betrayal was so devastating. In an ocean of incredible outcomes, as wave after wave crashes onto the shore, in my mind, Melanie leaving me would be a continent away. Even now, after years of self-reflection and disciplined and consistent rebuilding of my self-confidence, I knew I would never be the same. Soulmates never give up on each other, but mine gave up. Of course, he must have been desperate. The lawsuits and attorney's fees totaled $12 million. He was rich, that's for sure, but he wasn't that rich. The Sharks believed that, in the end, the judge would award him almost $7 million. One day, they tried to explain their calculations to me. My book was called Property and had a valuation, and his claim was frivolous and without merit, and they collected a mountain of evidence to prove that he and his lawyer knew about it. It all sounded like the one who spewed the most truthful nonsense would win. However, his mistake won't leave him penniless, but it will be pretty darn close. And without a source of income, like on a silver platter, without the luxurious job that he received before, such an outcome would be catastrophic. It was the only thing that made sense. He sent her to stop me in a last-ditch effort to save the only thing that truly mattered to him: money. He needed a wife and a family. Melanie looked up but didn't say anything. I knew for sure that she had no idea what I was talking about. I had to admire his ability to keep her in the dark. I could never hide even the smallest secret from her, mainly because the guilt would eat me alive. Apparently, conscience was not one of John Davis's concerns. Several members of the board of directors began to ask him questions. Why doesn't he have a family? When is he going to stop? The long list of women and parties? It wasn't that they didn't care about him or the women, but it could be a problem for the company. You can't afford to have your next CEO involved in a sex scandal. This is bad for business. He simply asked Stephanie Carmichael to marry him for money. Of course, she had sex with him for money, so he probably thought she would just go along with it. Stephanie was what most people would call a slut, or at least that was the rumor around the plant, and her husband, David, was what I called an ass. I never had first-hand knowledge of their exploits, but I had heard the stories. Most often, rumors are just rumors, but in their case, I always believed that they could be true. Stephanie Carmichael has always been the woman who shows too much skin, wears an outfit that's a little out of place, and says something that could easily mean something much different. Her husband was always the guy who talked about what a sexy piece of ass his wife was and tried to get guys to admit that they had their eyes on her. However, what would have been a laughable story about any other person actually seemed plausible to them. One-night stands, wild house parties, photos, and videos on the internet. I had no idea if any of this was true, but what I did know was that David Carmichael's name was another name crossed off the infamous list, and Stephanie's name was written next to it. And David mysteriously disappeared immediately after his dismissal. Also, while I always thought she was a very stupid bleached blonde, she obviously wasn't as stupid as she often looked. She has the gift tax records to prove it. For 3 years, he gave her almost $150,000 for treatments twice a week. Steffi, as she seemed to prefer to be called, spilled all about Davis's little scheme to seduce her. She also did not hide the fact that she had sex with him for money. We had an agreement. He was generous with gifts, and I showed him my appreciation as best I could every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon in the apartment he rented for me. My husband and I appreciated his gifts, but as soon as my Davy finished nursing school and came home, I left that fat bastard. She also had no problem giving a very convincing explanation for why he still got some money on the side for years after marrying Melanie. I looked directly at Melanie as I finished my next sentence. Obviously, he was looking for something he couldn't get at home. I wasn't sure Stephanie was telling the truth until I saw Melanie's eyes. Then I became convinced of this. Of course, she can make everything up, because it sure doesn't sound like the woman I was married to. I could tell she was about to lose her temper. It had been almost an hour since she had made a sound. I decided that if I was ever going to get my pound of flesh, it would have to be soon. So what did he tell you when he sent you here? He told me to force you to stop the litigation by any means necessary. Does he often boss you around or only when he's about to lose his fortune? He's not my agent. He is my husband. Hey, don't judge too harshly. So when do we get to the by any means necessary part of the show? Because, to be honest, this part of making a compelling argument has gotten a little tedious. And what do you need to do? She said it with such a lack of conviction. It was the only time I allowed myself to feel even the slightest pity for her. It was simply beyond my comprehension. How could someone so beautiful, so full of life, so energetic, have such a lack of self-confidence? How could this man allow himself to be used in this way? For money. To be honest, I understood the appeal at least a little. My favorite chair cost me over $1,000. When we furnished our first apartment, I'm not sure Melanie and I spent that much on everything we had. So, yes, it was extravagant, but at the same time it was damn convenient. However, I had no doubt that I would have traded all my extravagances for one more day spent alone with Melanie in our small and squalid first apartment, for everything to be as it was. I think it just made us different people. Like I said, Even if I could stop it, I wouldn't. I think you should go home to your husband and tell him that I wasn't even interested in his proposal. Get back to him with your slutty ass, meet him, and talk about how you are going to get through this difficult period in your life. I am sure that with a love as strong as yours, you will cope. I looked at her. I looked at her perfect lips that I wanted to kiss. I watched as her beautiful silk blouse parted slightly from her stunning cleavage, revealing only traces of her very thin and probably equally expensive underwear. It took all my willpower not to rip it off her body, sending the buttons flying to take another look at her incredibly ample breasts. But I didn't. After all, soulmates never give up on each other. I waited for tears, but they never came. Of course, water was pooling in her eyes, and I thought that for a moment she might let it spill. But she didn't. I had to give her credit for that at least. Get out of my house, and don't ever bring your ass back. Our conversation lasted a couple of hours, but I had no plans to have sex with her. To be honest, I didn't think about it at all. There were too many other thoughts in my head. The weeks leading up to this night were full of surprises. But she was beautiful. And I was a man. And she proposed. What should a girl do to get the supplement? I took her glass and went to the kitchen. I filled it with her chosen wine and returned with her glass and bottle. I read your book. Twice. I would have responded with a witty comment or sincere gratitude if I had not been mesmerized by what was in front of me. I would have had a better chance of finding the words if I hadn't been wondering what happened to her blouse and feeling sorry for myself for not noticing she was gone. Luckily, I could watch her take off her skirt, and I couldn't help but wonder about all this adventure, all this self-discovery, all this... She continued, standing in her almost see-through black bra. My thoughts were directed to the purely decorative quality of her underwear, because although her breasts seemed much larger than necessary for her small figure, they stood firm and high on their own, receiving absolutely no support from the fragile, transparent material. This fact was confirmed moments later when she reached one hand behind her and with a practiced motion unclasped her bra, allowing it to fall to the floor. I was amazed when her breasts didn't move at all. Research will make you a better man in bed. I've been told I'm pretty impressive. Oh, I have no doubt. I stood firm until she turned around, ran her hands down the back of her long, slender legs, and carefully unfastened the straps of her heels. But you will forgive me if I don't want to take your word for it. My hands reached forward to cup her breasts, and hers followed mine. My lips and teeth nibbled the base of her neck, earlobes, and shoulder. My attack intensified with every breath she took. She felt weightless as I quickly picked her up and carried her to the bed. I playfully pushed her onto her back as she giggled. Her brunette curls framed her angelic face, but her deep brown eyes could not hide the fire in them. My mouth was almost instantly on her lips. My tongue sought shelter among her hot breath. I could no longer contain my pent-up passion. Her gentle fingers running along my spine woke me from my blissful rest. Oh my God, Braden, your ex was a fucking idiot. Oh, Julie, you say the nicest things. Julie stayed with me every night for the next 4 months, as the judgments made their way through the court of inquiry. We had sex as newlyweds throughout her stay with me, although she always said that no matter how impressive the sex was, she intended to return to New York as soon as the legal battle was over. I was not at all offended by her. Little sharks with just a few hours of law practice left don't stick to the shallow end of the pool, no matter how much they enjoy spending their free time there. However, the time spent with her, however short it was amazing. The first night we were together, she was at my apartment explaining the latest lawsuit. This was a lawsuit from my daughter, who was suing me to save her inheritance. I can't say with certainty that I didn't know Melanie was angry when she left that last night, even furious. But I can say that I genuinely thought she was mad at me. Maybe because I turned her down or stole what she rightfully earned on her back. Obviously, I was wrong. I can't imagine what it was like for him. I know I was devastated when Melanie didn't choose me when faced with the usual problem of downsizing. But, again, the coroner's report was inconclusive. John Davis may never know. A few hours after she left me, so drunk she was barely conscious, Melanie shot him. Once, bullet fragments severed his femoral artery. She then turned the gun on herself. They said he quickly bled to death. She most likely died immediately, but no one can say for sure whether he lived long enough to know that she would rather kill herself than accept him when he was poor. I can't imagine what it was like, but I hope he had at least a moment to think about it. Anyway, I spent a few days being angry at Melanie. Not for me, but for her daughter. No matter how bad Melanie was, her daughter needed her. No, April didn't give me any indication that she and Melanie were close. Quite the contrary. However, she was a lost girl that one time she came to me. She didn't remember me at all, at least not the real one. This surprised me very much. I thought she was old enough to remember, but memories can be replaced by lies if heard often enough. She clearly didn't believe me when I said that we were happy once upon a time, a long time ago, together. And they were family. And now there is no one left who could confirm this. One photograph on the wall out of hundreds of photographs could not and did not require change her opinion. She was sad at Melanie's funeral, and I completely understood. Unfortunately, months later, it seems like I'm still enemy number one, with little hope of changing her mind. When the decision was finally made, and her inheritance was all but lost, she hurried out of the courtroom, narrowly avoiding a contempt charge for the profanity-laced tirade she left behind. That was the last time I saw her, and I don't have much hope that I'll ever see her again. The bond I hoped we would always have turned out to be as fragile as the one between her mother and me. But maybe fathers and daughters are different things. Maybe Mr. and Mrs. John Davis didn't completely turn her against me. And someday, she will learn that she can always count on her father's help. Or maybe she will find herself in the big world. Or he will find his soulmate. Hopefully one that won't give up on her. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.